with the goal of linking these countries to the EU and to bring them closer to the European Union, to link them with the EU market, and then through association agreements with some of the countries, also with 4 freedoms. What was not envisioned at the birth of Eastern Partnership policy was a promise of EU membership. Explicitly, the EU membership was not on the table. This has changed a few months ago, and now we have EU membership that Ukrainian government, after it was attacked, applied for, and then Georgia jumped the bandwagon, and after some hesitation also Moldova. So a very different picture also for Eastern Neighbourhood. And one of the questions we will discuss here is what is the future of this policy, whether there is still some rationale for Eastern Partnership, and how the European Union want to actually approach its Eastern Neighbourhood, and from the perspective of our Eastern neighbors, how they see a joint policy of Brussels, and whether they are in their accession to the EU, whether they are rather allies or competitors. So let me maybe start with a request to the audience. We also have, I forgot to mention that we have keynote listener Eleonora for Ambrosetti, a research fellow at ISPI in Italy, who lived in Turkey for several years, and she will start our Q&A with a comment specifically on Turkey, which is also a very active player in the neighborhood. So let me start also acknowledging that to come here, at least the 2 of you had to travel not an easy route. So please give me, help me to give a round of applause to all our panelists to come. And start with a very simple question. Why did you apply for EU membership after Ukraine did it and was attacked? I think Georgia made the change.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I'm really glad to be here for the 2nd consecutive time, and I'm really happy to be one of the speakers of this panel. So, and you mentioned Ukraine, and you mentioned attack on Ukraine, which was at the beginning of this year. So unfortunately, it happened at the times when we 3, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, were trying somehow to establish the new formats and new cooperation and new ideas how to develop our cooperation with European Union. Unfortunately, I'm saying because the war in Ukraine started, and what we have seen there, so the full-scale aggression from the Russian side in Ukraine, and total, I don't know how to call it, maybe it's criminality against all the nation, what is happening now in Ukraine, force us to apply and force us to together, and you mentioned already that Ukraine after Georgia and Moldova have applied for the EU membership. So we were planning initially to apply for the membership in 2024, so our government was preparing for this, and we have association agreement with European Union with already a new association agenda for 7 years, which is unprecedented because previously we didn't have such a long-term action plan regarding the engagement with the cooperation with European Union. We have DCFTA, we have really progress in sectoral cooperation with European Union, and so in our review, so we're planning just to have application for 2024. But what's happening now in Ukraine and what forced us, it was a real and clear vision from the Russian side that neighbors cannot be developed, and we cannot be safe if we are not under the safe umbrella, such as European Union, such as NATO in our case. So because of this, our government decided just to apply for the membership, and we decided not only to apply, but to accelerate our reform process and to accelerate our engagement with European Union. So I do think that what was the decision taken in June of this year, of course, maybe we were expecting more because, as you know, so we were the front runners among the Eastern partner countries regarding the fulfillment of our obligations and regarding the association agreement implementation. But again, we got the clear message that we are going to be the part of Union. We got European perspective, which we could not dream even a year ago, even 6 months ago before we got this, because in December of the last year, so we had an Eastern Partnership Summit and we were struggling for the European perspective. So I think that...
Sorry, let me cut you here
yes.
and move to another panelist. What Georgia got from the European Council in June was a conditional
yes.
candidate status, you may say. In their conditions, we will discuss what are chances of your government to fulfill them by the December report of the Commission. But Moldova, together with Ukraine, got a full candidate status for EU membership out of that European Council. There are some voices that it's an empty political symbol. It doesn't matter much, and that it doesn't provide you what you need the most as a country, which is security, or even energy security of supply, because the European Union is not a defense alliance. How do you respond to such critical voices? What does the candidate status mean for Moldova?
Thank you, Milan. I think no one really expected anything to significantly change between February and June when Moldova got the candidate status. So there is a certain degree of, you know, if it was normal circumstances, we would have not gotten it. The same as Georgia, we could have only dreamt about it. But I think what it changed for the Moldovan citizens, it's really to have a ray of hope that you can think of a future in this country. We did feel very threatened at the beginning of the invasion, and a lot of people started leaving. Economic agents started closing down and leaving. So I think what we really needed was a political gesture that there is clear determination and interest to, on behalf of the European Union, also to see Moldova as a potential EU member state in the future. It's also true that it depends now on us what we do with this candidate status. If we don't manage really to show a clear clear reforms and political determination that we are willing to walk the talk, it might stay as an empty political gesture. But I would like also to take this opportunity and say that we take it as a true sign of confidence that the current Moldovan government can deliver on the reforms and that we are committed to these reforms.
Very good. Maciej, Popowski, what does this decision by the European Council means for the European Commission? You are busy helping to revive the EU enlargement to the 6 Balkan countries. Some of them are already negotiating about membership. There is a growing demand also from this country, Slovenia, that Bosnia-Herzegovina should be given a candidate status. Bosnia has been waiting for a candidate status, they say forever, but at least for a decade. And instead there is a candidate status granted to Ukraine and Moldova, which are not in full control of their own territories. One of them is in war. Decision has been taken. What does it mean for the Commission that actually oversees both neighborhood policy and enlargement?
Look, if anybody has revived the enlargement policy, it was the Russians. But what was interesting for me, it is still the case, was to see this moment of synthesis for the first time ever, where the neighborhood and enlargement policies actually converged. And a group of countries is now moving from one sort of policy framework into another. But the fact is that enlargement is back with a vengeance. When you look at how much time our leaders spend discussing enlargement, it's never easy, but they do engage a lot. Of course, it was all accelerated by the war and its consequences, but it's not over, which means more work for us, but that's very good because enlargement has always been an important policy area, and also it's also good for the Balkans. Because when we started working on the candidate status, on the opinions on the candidate status, the first reaction in the Balkans was that of apprehension. I mean, you know, what does it mean for us? And I think Edi Rama said, do you expect the Russians to start bombing us that we can move ahead? But it has created a certain momentum, which is certainly positive. I also see that because the president has invested so much and took some risks.
The president of the commission.
The president of the commission
There were many presidents
took some risks to put it on the agenda and to go for an ambitious outcome of the June European Council, which was unprecedented. Many people didn't believe it until the very last moment. So our plate is pretty full. Now we have to do a lot of day-to-day work. Everybody knows the list of, we never call them conditions, it's steps to be taken. We were very, very careful about the choice of our language, but these lists are pretty clear, but it is a first step. So we expect Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia to take a certain number of steps. We have to report on the state of play, but then look into the actual delivery. So in most of the cases, I mean, the institutions are there, people are being appointed, but we need a track record on the fight against corruption, on media freedom, on judiciary, on economic freedom. And that will take some time, and as you may remember, the European leaders have tasked us to report on the progress by the three countries as part of our Enlargement Report 2023, which means they will be treated exactly the same way as the Balkan countries. And of course, the Balkan countries have their own problems. You mentioned Bosnia. I don't want to go into that now. I can if you ask me to.
There is another panel.
We have to come back. We have to come back to it certainly later this year, because the leaders spent quite some time again discussing Bosnia in June. But it's the same rules for all and the same direction of travel.
If I may move our discussion to you, Stephen, with the following two questions. One, we heard from Maciej that this is a moment of synthesis between the neighborhood policy, Eastern neighborhood policy, maybe even Eastern partnership, and the enlargement. And number two, Mr. Popowski mentioned a homework that was given to the three candidate or two candidate countries and the potential candidate. As somebody who has been researching and observing the whole procedure of accession process for many years, can you enlighten us what is going to happen for Ukraine and Moldova in the coming year? What do they need to fulfill? How is the process designed?
You should really ask Maciej, who is of course behind the buttons of the machine, and we know that the process itself has been adapted over the years. I mean, there's no, in legal terms, there's very little to go by in a way, and the European Council has, since the Copenhagen criteria, refined its own methodology, of course. So there's nothing to say that the methodology might be further refined in the future. In fact, the latest iteration of it was in 2020 with a revised methodology which would bring more involvement of the member states in conjunction with the European Commission in supporting reform processes in the countries and monitoring, of course, them in preparation of the regular reports. Now, the conditions that have been spelled out, and Maciej already alluded to the fact that these steps now have to be taken by the aspirant member states, and they will be monitored and reported upon next year in the context of, at least as far as Ukraine and Moldova are concerned, in the context of the enlargement process. With Georgia, we had, of course, the recent regular report already. So those conditions are spelled out and are, of course, up for, well, interpretation. Some of those conditions are rather vague. If you look at the Georgian set of 12 conditions, you know, one can interpret how political polarization ought to be really you know, broken when you have political parties, of course, that are at loggerheads with one another. The most famous of conditions in the Georgian case is, of course, de-oligarchization, which is a different kettle of fish that perhaps a Georgian colleague wants to elucidate. I have my own views on that.
Or avoid to comment.
Well, that's up to you, Milan, as moderator, to see how that goes. But in terms of the enlargement process, of course, before one reaches the formal stage of opening accession talks, a few steps still need to be taken, as indicated.
Do you see a symbiosis of the two policies, neighborhood and enlargement?
To the sense that, of course, the duo and potentially the trio of Eastern Partnership countries that have now been granted a European perspective and some candidate country status now fall, as Maciej has mentioned, squarely within the enlargement framework, policy framework, and in a way leave behind the other Eastern Partnership countries, thus potentially emptying that neighborhood policy framework of the European Union from content. If it wants to be maintained, and I'm sure we'll discuss it more in detail, then it needs to be filled with substance.
Cristina, so what is being planned now by your government? And I know that you come from the office of the president, but Moldova got a set of steps to be taken. I'm sure that your government was busy this summer outlining these plans. What is actually happening on the EU track in Chisinau these weeks? There was a big celebration after the candidate status was taken. You also celebrated 31 years of independence, I think last week, as Moldova, in the shadow of the war in your neighboring country. But what is being done by the government or the president on the EU accession track?
So what we did was, first of all, establish a National Committee on European Integration, and that's a very comprehensive platform that involves the parliament, the government, civil society. We also invited members of the Gagauzien authority, so we tried to be as comprehensive as possible. We designed an action plan based on these 9 steps that were mentioned in the Commission's opinion on what needs to be undertaken in the future. We have consulted this action plan informally with the Commission just to hear what their views are on this. We have largely discussed it with civil society to see what their feedback is on that. I can only say that 2 major components there are reforms on rule of law that we need to do, and also the de-oligarchization component. Again, as Stephen has mentioned, some of them are very vague, some of them are very concrete. So what we tried to do was to break down these steps into more measurable indicators so that it would be easier for the Commission when the evaluation report comes to see what has been done. So by the end of this year, we have designed several steps, mostly legislative changes that need to be done in order to pick up the first few conditions that are outlined in the Commission's opinion.
Over to you, Mr. Janjalia. What is the plan of Georgian government to fulfill these steps to be taken, and which one do you consider the most difficult?
In July, beginning of July, so the working groups have been already created just to address these 12 recommendations which were given to Georgia until tasks to be fulfilled. So 9 working groups have been created, and the lead now in these working groups, of course, under the observation of the government, has the parliament. So because the main points which we have in these recommendations, so they are the points which should be addressed within the parliament. So there are new legislation, there are what we have already mentioned, the process of polarization, which should be somehow to be is it? And in these 9 working groups, 5 political entities which are in the parliament now are working, and they're trying just to somehow to manage, first of all, polarization, to depolarize the political situation in Georgia, and after all, just to proceed further with the fulfillment of the recommendations till the end of this year. So we are going to, and there is a concrete action plan. So with concrete legislative changes, adoptions in new laws, and until the end of this year, so we are planning just to finalize the process, and we are expecting that some preliminary assessment can be already from European Union at the end of this year. Of course, we're not expecting about some concrete decision, because the decision, as we were informed, is going to be taken the next year. But we're really happy that we are already in the enlargement package with the Balkan countries, and it's going to be the mutual approach to the Balkan region and 3 of us. And I do hope that what we have planned and how we are going to proceed till the end of this year, we will manage and finalize the work which is our homework and which we're going to take and are taking very seriously.
Quick follow-up question on this. There were huge demonstrations in Tbilisi after the conditional candidate status was given, after Georgia was taken away from the duo, Ukraine and Moldova. These demonstrations then seeded down. What did you, at the leadership of the foreign ministry, taken from these demonstrations on the streets and criticism of the civil society, criticism of the government? And are you working also with think tanks on fulfilling these conditions?
So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is always engaged with the think tanks, and we already have a communication with them. As I mentioned, so the Parliament is leading now the process, and within these working groups, which I mentioned, 9 working groups, civil society as well is invited, and civil society is engaged as well. What was on the street, so it was a demand from the Georgian population, because unfortunately, as I mentioned in my introductory speech, that some movements, some political views, some political actions internally and externally have made for Georgia a process not so beneficial as for Moldova and Ukraine, but again and again. So government is devoted to the process of European engagement, involvement. Government is devoted, and cannot be anyway, because you know that in our constitution is written, the preamble of constitutions, that the European integration, along with the NATO integration, is a priority of any government which comes to the power, and our full membership is the main goal of Georgia's authority. So because of this, so we have seen and mentioned as well that already European perspective gave us additional impetus to the government to work much more harder. If we were planning, as I mentioned, for 2024, so we accelerated the process. We accelerated the process of procedural, we accelerated the process of the legislative changes, and we are devoted to this, and we, as mentioned, so till the end of this year, we'll show the results. With the civil society, with the engagement of the opposition, with the engagement of the foreign experts, as we were as well interacting and cooperating, and I think that we will succeed on this matter.
So, Mr. Popowski, from the side of the Commission, please bring us here, or describe the timetable ahead. So what does it mean in terms of timing? Where are some kind of milestones ahead? And also, let's not forget, we are discussing the trio, but the Eastern Partnership policy was designed for a region of 6 countries. There are 2 neighbors of Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, which had war and which are not part of this accession track. And also then neighbor of Poland, Belarus, that is suspended from European partnership. So my second question would be, okay, there is a timetable for the accession track, but is there a timetable for the European partnership?
The last thing I want to comment on is timelines, because it's actually counterproductive. Accession process takes time. I usually give the example of my own country. And these were the heydays of enlargement, the 90s. And it took 10 years from the application to the actual membership. 10 years. I don't want to discourage anybody, but it simply takes time. And we are going to report. I mean, we are looking forward to Europe, to the fulfillment of the conditions. We are going to report. But then we still need to sell it to the member states. And for each and every step on the way, we need unanimity in the Council. And that's the way it is. And we need, for instance, I mean, I mentioned already the need for results, a track record in the fight against corruption or the media freedom. We've had it before with some countries that really had to go an extra mile to show that they are moving ahead. So you know, any discussion on timelines is rather artificial, if not futile. So let's just focus on the job, and that's what really matters. And we are not going to lower the guard. Now, right after the summer, we will move ahead, for instance, with the screening of the acquis with North Macedonia and Albania next week or the week after. We will be, of course, working on the three countries. I mean, whatever needs to be done. We are indeed constant exchanges with the capitals, actually on a weekly basis. So, you know, there's a lot for us to do. What it means for the other, I guess you mean the other three countries of the Eastern Partnership. By the way, we have to make a distinction between the Eastern Partnership and the neighborhood policy as such, because it also includes the Southern neighborhood, and then not much has changed. The advantage of the Eastern Partnership is that it has always been pragmatic and institutionally light. We didn't build up anything big. There is no secretariat. There is, you know, it's not heavy. And we've always focused on the advantages for the people, whether it was the scaling up of the Erasmus exchange scheme, roaming charges, lowering of tariffs, etc., etc. That is still on the table. We can still use it. Of course, it practically leaves us with two countries, which is Armenia and Azerbaijan, because Belarus is not included anymore. But with Belarus, we have a separate track. Not with Belarus, not with the regime, to be very clear. We stopped any cooperation with the regime in August 2020, right after the rigged elections. But we continue working very closely with the Belarusian opposition, and I'm very glad to see more and more attempts at consolidation. I mean, it's a long way for them to get there. I mean, to build up a free and democratic Belarus. But they try to get their act together, and we redirected all our assistance to help them and help civil society, to help scholars and students and media operating from wherever they are. Most of them are abroad. So that's for. I mean, the Eastern Partnership, we are not going to abandon it. We just have to scale down certain activities for obvious reasons. But we want to keep the framework because it's good for the people.
Stephen, do you see Eastern Partnership as dead?
It's a policy framework in search of a new meaning of life. It's been emptied, as we said, you know, with the redirection of policy frameworks by Moldova and Georgia and Ukraine in the first place, and potentially Georgia. But there's much that remains, but follows, I think, a more regular and global connectivity agenda first and foremost, and could be further developed along those lines, of course. And there are elements that have been mentioned, some of which have been ramped up as well in recent months in the connectivity sphere. We saw the von der Leyen visit in July to Baku to sign a memorandum of energy security. I forgot the exact name of it. We've seen Charles Michel take another stab at his role as peacemaker in the region. Didn't really work in Georgia, as we know, in the long run. So it's difficult proposition for a president of the European Council to take on such a mantle or cloak. But he's trying now to mediate between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. And indeed, as far as Belarus is concerned, the Eastern Partnership still provides a framework to channel funds to free Belarus, the opposition, the supposedly democratic opposition forces, mainly in exile, of course. So there is substance to the policy framework. I'm sure that with the upcoming Swedish presidency of the Council, with Sweden together with Poland having stood at the cradle of the Eastern Partnership, they will not want to do away with their policy child and will try to maintain it and fill it with meaning. Can I jump back to the previous question you asked also in connection with the EU enlargement? Because
yes,
indeed, timelines are very difficult to mention, but what is well known in this region of the Western Balkans is that those timelines have been incredibly long, much longer than the 10 years that it took Poland from application to entry. And process has become part of the problem. And member states having veto power over almost every step of the way is, of course, not facilitating the type of geopolitical momentum that is needed for the European Union to deal with the forces on the continent. So there is, I think, not just an exposure of the member states having hidden behind this process and hijacked it at several instances by using veto powers individually to settle bilateral accounts, basically, with candidate countries. This has painfully exposed, of course, the type of neglect that the member states have shown towards their promise to integrate these countries, hopefully in one's lifetime, and the need, of course, to revamp it, to really get a hands-on involvement. Whether the revised methodology of March 2020 will be sufficient remains to be seen. I'm doubtful that they will, gain credibility if they follow the way they have been doing, and the success of the lack of success in the Western Balkans should be a harbinger for the new candidate countries of the Eastern Partnership. That more is needed, not just from their side, but member state side as well.
Stephen, this is for another panel, as you know. And yes, the new methodology has not even been used on the Western Balkan countries. Montenegro, which is the front runner, just shut down its government. So the European Commission was getting ready to use the new methodology. Now they don't have a strong partner. So I want to come back to the Eastern Partnership as a policy, as a framework for not only the trio or duo plus one and the rest of that, but let me just maybe close this part of our discussion by saying that, of course, the EU enlargement or the accession process will have to change so that Moldova or Ukraine can become members in the future. And we heard from the German Chancellor yesterday in Prague that if the EU is an anchor of stability in the European continent, it has to sort of credibly advance the candidate countries down the road. But there is still a policy of Eastern Partnership that was born after war in Georgia in 2009. And the next year, Sweden wants to hold a summit of Eastern Partnership. We just had another summit that Slovenia held before the war in Ukraine. And my question to you, I will close, let me ask this question, do a quick round, ask about Macron's European political community, and then open the floor to you for your questions and comments. But to finish this, thought about the future, uncertain future of Eastern Partnership. We heard that Eastern Partnership needs to change if it is to survive. And I would ask you as Eastern partners, if there is still a demand for such a policy, a joint policy of the European Union towards your countries, starting with Moldova. Now, of course, all your attention and government focus is on the pre-accession, accession track as a candidate status. Do you still see a need for Eastern Partnership?
Well, if we look at the objective of the Eastern Partnership, and that was really to meet the demands and the needs of the citizens of these countries, I don't see how they have changed significantly, that we would not need, the different projects within the Eastern Partnership framework as such. What has changed indeed is this political determination of 3 countries to have more than the Eastern Partnership. So I would say, as long as the EEP still focuses on the needs of the citizens, then there is definitely need for it. But if we look at the extension of it, which means the candidate status and the future steps to take, then this policy is not enough.
How is this for Georgia? And may I plead for a short answer?
Yes, for us as well. So we always are saying that this partnership is already a success story, because we 3 came out as a front runners, and we already are the potential candidate states. But we have till 3 countries, maybe at this moment 2. We soon be just to be more engaged. We always were advocating that the tailor-based approach and of course interests which these countries have to be addressed from the European Union as well, and to interact on this direction. So we have the potential. You mentioned the president's visit to Azerbaijan and the energy deal. So it is, and it's necessary for the European Union to engage these countries more, especially Azerbaijan, and Armenia as well, because Armenia has its own interests, and we have to address them, and we have to keep them in the format. In fact, that just to keep the peace in the region, and to have the development in the region. And just one short comment on the regional cooperation. Just that Georgia is engaged really actively regarding the Azerbaijan and Armenia interaction and cooperation, and it was really a success that foreign ministers of 2 countries met in Tbilisi, and they discussed the concrete issues of interaction and cooperation, and we discussed prospects of this cooperation, and we saw that engagement of in this process of the European Union, it's really important and drastic. And when this country are cooperating, when we 3 are together, so I think there is a partnership of its future, notwithstanding the fact that this initiative could not just prevent some really aggressive actions from the neighboring countries, but again and again. So we are here, and we see the prospects of development.
And just to add also a few points from our project on the network of think tanks in Eastern Partnership countries and the EU. There will be a consultation visit to Georgia and Armenia by our colleagues next week to discuss with think tanks and your government exactly these questions, as well as the steps to be taken on the candidate status for Georgia and on the future peace settlement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. If you want to learn more about the future of neighborhood, Eastern Partnership, future of Eastern Partnership, but also the merge of neighborhood and enlargement policy, you can read our article with my colleague Anastasia Pochumban, who is sitting here in the Bled Strategic Times that is distributed here on page 14. So let me do that promotion here and move to the last point in our panel, which is Emmanuel Macron's idea of European political community. We heard that the accession track for the Duo +1 will take a long time. We also heard that the accession with the Western Balkan countries is stagnating and might be revived, but it will take long. And in this environment, with the Russia war on Ukraine and huge uncertainty, French president came with the new format that he proposed, European political community. Further discussion on this is in the conclusions from the European Council in June. The leaders will meet in an informal setting in Prague, I think on 7th of October, to discuss structures or more modalities. How do you see this new animal, Stephen? What do you expect from it?
The proverbial elephant that 5 Indians try to to get a shape of. But I mean, there is no clear conception as of yet. Laurence Bone's intervention yesterday and her op-ed in the Financial Times of last week give us some idea that this intergovernmental platform for leaders to meet to discuss security issues on the continent will be complemented in a more concrete way with connectivity issues. Trade was mentioned in a op-ed, energy, digital cooperation perhaps. The risk I see is that this type of new all-encompassing framework risks rubbing up against existing structures. On security, the OSCE, minus Russia and Belarus, for sure. On connectivity issues, with Commission-led and monitored, implemented programs. And so you have, if you want to avoid a clash, of course, of an intergovernmentally driven European political community that ventures into areas which for the EU are monitored and also for its neighbourhood policies, but the European Commission, then you risk a clash. As far as I understand, there's no willingness on the part of the Élysée to bring the Commission in, nor, I suppose, from a British side, you know, if they want to get involved in that context. So to me, that suggests that going down the route of fleshing out in a practical sense, you know, in a project-based sense, cooperation along these sectoral lines that are otherwise channeled through the policy frameworks that we've discussed is a difficult proposition to make. And by the lack of resonance here at the Bled Strategic Forum on Laurence Beaune's mentioning of the EPC as indeed, you know, the ownership that is being taken by member states of that idea to work together with the Élysée on this idea, it suggests that this might, you know, wither away, and perhaps that would not be a bad thing.
Paris announced that they were sending questionnaires to partner countries to ask them what they would need or expect from the European policy community. If you can share something, what do you expect from the new project, from the new format, the European policy community? What did you put in that questionnaire, Ms. Georgia?
I cannot share now what could be put in the questionnaire, but first of all, so at the initial stage when this initiative came out, so we were trying just to have more clarification about the initiative and how Paris itself was seen and how European Union was seeing the process. Till this moment, so we do not have the clarity on this direction. First of all. Then, secondly, you know how, so we already discussed the engagement of us, Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, and the processes of European integration, what the formats we have already created, what the interaction and cooperation we have with European Union. And we would like to progress up to our membership to the European Union. If this initiative contributes to this process and doesn't hinder this process, so of course we can discuss this and we can be in favor of this, of course.
Cristina, what does Moldova expect from European political community?
We were very concerned before the June 23rd decision that this newly launched or announced platform at the time would replace the, possibility of getting the candidate status. But it was very clearly, I think, sounded that this is not going to replace, this is going to complement the accession track for countries interested to become members of the EU. So that was first good news. And since the accession process indeed is not going to take a year or 2 years, it's going to be a very long process, and we are prepared to undergo that process. For us, EPC is, an additional platform where Moldova can be known more to the member states, get more linkages with member states. We have a big problem because, who knows Moldova? Even before the June meeting, there were still, member states with whom we haven't really had direct contact since the new government came in. So that was a huge risk on their behalf to, give us this vote of confidence on 23rd of June. So for us, this platform, again, we don't know what will be the final shape of it, would be an opportunity to get Moldova more integrated, more represented, and better known by the member states.
And let me close the panel with you, Maciej. The EPC, if it involves European institutions, and if we hear from the French government, there will be projects to support partners from the European institutions. It's the European Commission that deals with these things. Where do you see the role of European Commission in this new format?
Because we're still looking forward to this concept note that was announced in June, on which the previous and the current presidency have been working. I think there will be a place for us one way or another. For me, the EPC is like a political co-working space for leaders, which has advantages. Because when you look at the dynamics in the European Council, it's really based on a personal rapport among people. And if you extend it to the Balkans, to Moldova, to Georgia, to Ukraine, to Turkey and others, it may actually help in the long run. I'm not sure. I mean, let's see how we go about the projects. When we had it at a much smaller scale in the Balkans, where several different concepts sort of converged. Our economic area that we put forward in 2018, with the Open Balkans and the Berlin process. But the substance stayed with us, meaning we were designing and financing and implementing the projects to bring about better connectivity, for instance. If it has to be, if the idea is to extend it and to have a broader framework with non-EU member states, with those who are not going to be EU member states or no longer are member states, and the potential future member states, why not?
With this, let me open the floor to your questions and comments, and I will start with our keynote listener or keynote commentator, Eleonora Ambrosetti, who was patiently listening and waiting for her comments. If you could please take the microphone, and if you could also comment the role of Turkey in the neighborhood and in the EPC.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for such an insightful panel. I really learned a lot. And Milan spoiled the surprise. I'm indeed going to talk about Turkey. And I'd like first to ask to Dr. Gherasimov and Mr. Janjalia, how do you evaluate the role of Turkey from your perspective in the framework of the Russian invasion? Because the invasion has forced many countries to take sharper foreign policy decisions, like take the EU as a whole, or Finland and Sweden with their NATO membership bid. But many other countries in the region kept having this multivectoral foreign policy, and this is the case for Turkey. And we saw that in yesterday's panel with Minister Çavuşoğlu. So from your perspective, is Turkey's role a constructive one, or what would you expect Ankara to do more? And of course, especially with Georgia, I mean, the stakes are higher given the deep economic and political relationship with Ankara. And to Mr. Popowski, I'd like to ask a similar question with regards to Turkey, because we always hear about the Western Balkans in the framework of the new enlargement wave, but we don't hear about Turkey anymore, and the reasons are clear, I guess. But still, do you foresee a possible good role for Turkey in the enlargement process with these new candidate countries? Thank you.
So I have a question for my panelists. How do we go now? Either you answer Eleonora's question, or we take more questions from the audience. How do you want to do it? So let's do it quickly, and there are also more hands in the room. So let's start with Georgia.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And you know that Turkey is our strategic partner and closest neighbor. So we have, you mentioned that, really active political and economic interactions. So and Turkey plays a really important role in the region. So Turkey plays a really important role nowadays regarding the Armenia and Azerbaijan. So Turkey plays a really important role regarding the connectivity, regarding the to supply the energy sources from Caspian Sea bases to European markets. And of course, Turkey plays a really important role now regarding the war in Ukraine. So they have their own policies, they have own vision how to proceed further, how to interact in the region. And as a small neighbor, so Georgia as well is trying somehow to balance its political stance and its political activities regarding the regional cooperation, regarding the Georgia's engagement within the European Union. And of course, we always are trying just to benefit from the processes, always are trying to keep our interaction and to keep interaction with Turkey as well for the benefit, not only the small Caucasian region, but in the wider region format. So Turkey has a really important role, as I mentioned, and this role cannot be just to be diminished. So I think that we should find points of our interaction and cooperation in the future on many other directions like economic, energy, transportation, security policies, the region, and especially when we are talking about the Black Sea. Black Sea security we get without engagement of Turkey, without engagement of our NATO alliance cannot be just to be manageable in the foreseeable future because of this. So we have to interact more, we have to find more ways to cooperate and more ways to find mutual points of cooperation and interaction.
Cristina?
It's a pity that our Ukrainian colleague is not here because I think they would be the right, counterparts to answer whether they see or they expect a bigger role on behalf of Turkey in this conflict. I could only comment on our relations with Turkey. As with Georgia, we have a strategic partnership with Turkey. Turkey historically has been very actively involved in Moldova. We also have a big ethnic minority of Turkish descent in the southern part of the country. We have excellent economic ties, social ties, cultural ties. So this is there. It has not been changed by the war. It's going good.
And Maciej Popowski.
Much, and if they have, then rather to the negative. On the other hand, of course, I mean the relationship with Turkey is too big to fail, and so we invest a lot. But I can't see any breakthrough without really a lasting improvement of relationship between Turkey and the EU member states or some EU member states. Not a punctual rapprochement, which happens from time to time, but really something of a fundamental nature. And we continue with our engagement, which is never easy. Until the outbreak of the war, I spent most of my time on Turkey in my job. Now I spend probably the same amount of time on Turkey, but I simply work longer to be able to deal with other issues. Whether it's the financial cooperation, migration management, political dialogue, and it's never easy because whatever we want to do, we have to convince the member states not to stand in the way. So it's a very complex relationship, but we are absolutely not giving up on that.
So I registered 3 raised hands. I take more questions in one go, and we start with gentlemen. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Ashot Hovakimian. I'm Armenian ambassador to Slovenia, based in Prague. I'm second consecutive year to this panel, and last time I had a very critical question, so my question now is much more critical. So we are in the panel which is Europe's Eastern Neighbourhood. Armenia is a full member of Eastern Neighbourhood. It's not a panel of association trio. It's not a panel on enlargement. It's much less a panel of relation of Turkey to the different other countries. But it's panel of Eastern Partnership. We don't understand why we are not here on the panel. We don't understand because we know what is inclusiveness. So it's no inclusiveness here. It's one of the principles of Eastern Partnership. We know that there are merits. If you look for the democracy, human rights indexes of Armenia, you can see very high indexes, much sometimes better with some countries of this association trio. So the question is, what are the principles when you are making your concept of the panel? Because we see some very strange expressions of my country in the concept. We had not very, let's say, clear, naming, and some situations of my country we were told about Azerbaijani-Armenian war. So there are very strange, let's say, situations where we have no possibility to be on the panel, to be invited, although we ask for that, and to be an equal member of Eastern Partnership on the platform. Thank you.
I guess I will have to react on this question later. Over there.
Thank you, Milena Lazarevic, European Policy Center, Belgrade. My question goes to perhaps predominantly Steven and Mr. Popowski, but also if the other colleagues want to comment. Since the process of EU accession is going to be, we know, quite long, and since we already know how it has lost its transformative power in the Western Balkans because it has been so open-ended and protracted, how do you feel that the process should be reframed or reformed in order to actually make it keep its transformative power and its allure in this very long period of accession? Thanks.
And one question here.
Hi, I'm Anastasia Bochumban. I also work at the German Council on Foreign Relations. And I think I have a bit of more philosophical, broader question on the future of the neighborhoods. So do you expect that the concept of the neighborhood to change in general? Because we now talk about Eastern neighborhood and then we have the Southern neighborhood. But now with the accession of the future accession for Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia, and then we have the Balkan states also in the enlargement process, do you see this shift and some platform for cooperation between these countries? And at the same time, a bit as a follow-up, Eastern Partnership was also based on common values. And the engagement with Azerbaijan was a bit stagnating until Russia's war in Ukraine, and now it revamped. So I also wonder, do we continue talking about the Eastern Partnership or these frameworks as value-based, or do we shift to more geopolitical cooperation and more strategic cooperation based on connectivity? And I think this question, on cooperation, I would also ask two of you, perhaps of the Western Balkans, but also on the EU level, if you foresee some formats to engage together the countries in accession. Steven, also I think you have also some thoughts on it.
Very good. We have less than 10 minutes to go, so let me start by answering comment of Armenian ambassador. Sir, I understand you have to say this, you are doing your job, but please understand also that this is not a panel on the Eastern Partnership, on the future of Eastern Partnership. We framed it as the panel on specifically on what happened after the June Council, focused on the most important feature there, and that is on the three countries that were invited for EU membership as the dramatic change in the Eastern neighborhood. And we in our project have also different formats where we invite Armenian colleagues to comment a very specific situation of Armenia in the whole neighborhood. And if you read our article on the page 14, we address the whole paragraph on Armenia. And the reason why to continue regional policy from the side of the European Commission is perhaps the position of Armenia. To address Milena's question, I will start maybe with Steven, who who didn't answer a previous question. So if you can take it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a self-promotional issue here, of course, which I gladly relegate back to the panel in which you will talk this evening about the staged accession process or model that we've proposed together as think tanks already in October last year. Essentially to graft a set of stages or steps onto the clustered methodology of the revised enlargement methodology of 2020 in an effort to bring online packages of benefits already much earlier in that negotiation process. Benefits which include both financial funding, structural funding, which should allow at an earlier stage and much longer to plug the socioeconomic gap which exists between candidate country status and the median member state, if you want, but also access to EU bodies and institutions as to socialize representatives, both parliamentarian as well as government and others, in European policy discussions, so as to go beyond, the uniquely bilateral relationship that otherwise defines their cooperation, which actually is a neat bridge to try and answer Anastasia's broader question. I've once posited the thesis that, in fact, European neighbourhood policy is classic foreign policy couched in, regional frameworks, part of them completely artificial, on geographical grounds, which, may not coincide with the current state of realities in geoeconomic and geopolitical senses. So there are helpful programs and platforms to bring representatives, government, parliamentarian, business, civil society, together to discuss issues which pertain to their common relationship to the European Union, but where at the end of the day, with a merits-based approach, again, the bilateral track prevails. And this is how the EU, as a collective, with its institutions and member states, grafts its foreign policy, to define relations with individual countries on its neighborhood. So what's the future of it? It could be the geopolitical union. I made some arguments, against the idea, but there are, perfect arguments to be made for it as a complement to what exists. The whole issue is, of course, of how this will be implemented. So I'm rather agnostic to the structuring of neighborhood policies. That remains a reality in a differentiated sense, depending on the level of ambition on both sides to define their relationship in a bilateral context.
How do you see it, Mr. Popowski?
Three.
Do we have the
Too much of an excitement here. Three brief comments on the first on the early benefits of staged integration. I mean, both Milan and Stephen know that I'm very open to different ideas because we've discussed it since February, I think, several times, and we are looking at different specific schemes, what we can do, which kind of programs we can open up, to which specific consultative bodies we could associate the new or the potential future members. It's doable. I think we must not overdo it, because if we try to build up something big, at each and every level, starting from the attaché all the way up to the heads of state and government, it will become very heavy. But we keep it on our radar, and it's also included in the 2020 enlargement methodology. So let's see how we go about it.
Can I ask you something? Because the European Council conclusions of June, there the leaders asked the Commission, the High Representative, and the Council to think about gradual integration and the introduction of reversibility has negative conditionality already in ongoing accession negotiations. So this is...
Yeah, but reversibility has always been there. Not, it was spelled out. But we, and it's there. It's there. I mean, it was a way of reassuring member states that were a bit less convinced that we should move ahead quickly. On the different regional cooperation formats, I would be rather reluctant to start yet another review process of the neighborhood policy. We can do that. It would probably take 5 years, and I'm not sure what the result would be. But we've always promoted regional cooperation and regional integration with varying levels of success. In the south, it's close to non-existent. But in the east, I mean, it's taking shape, and it's the same in the Balkans. And we have different formats and different bodies, sometimes overlapping, and we should simply make use of them. I mentioned the regional economic area in the Balkans before. We have the energy community, which is a very useful cooperation scheme for the countries taking part in it. There is still CEFTA, that was created in the 90s, but it's still there. So I think it has certain advantages for the participants. And on the question of values, I mean, we're not giving up on that. Of course, we engage with countries with which we have significant differences of views. So you mentioned the case of Azerbaijan, which is now an important partner for energy. But we saw, I mean, I was there myself less than a year ago, a willingness on the part of the government and the authorities to engage with us. So we can also be frank, but still cooperate.
We're running out of time, so please address the question on the regional policies and also your final comments, if you may keep it within 2 minutes.
Really shortly regarding the regional cooperation. So regional policy is really important, as was already mentioned, and we are promoting this within the Eastern Partnership, within the trio, and we are even today. So we see the prospect that the trio format can be developed and we can interact more. So regarding the Balkan states and three of us, so we see prospects as well of interaction and cooperation. So from my side, from our side, so we already started just some process of more engagement with the Balkan states and sharing experience regarding the European integration processes. And what we have seen is that it's a really positive attitude from the Western Balkan states, and we see the more prospects regarding not only Georgia but the trio as well, Balkan plus trio, associated trio countries, former associated trio, nowadays already the two candidates and potential candidate states. So I think that there is a prospect, and we have to be engaged more, and we have to cooperate more on this direction. And personally, I see the really good developments on this direction.
And a closing word from you, Cristina.
And also a closing remark on the regional cooperation. I think we have plenty of them. It's better to focus on the opportunities that they provide. Moldova is part of many cooperation mechanisms in the Western Balkans, but I think they're underused. So it's more important to focus on their substance rather than on redesigning them to fit better the objective. So here I agree. Final comments. I think we're still digesting what happened on June 23rd. All of us, the candidate and potential candidates, and probably also Brussels and the European capitals. I agree that the process is going to be a long one, so we are now focusing on what needs to be done to start with, on top of everything we're having on our Brussels agenda, to add the work on the 9 conditions or the 9 steps that are part of the new package that we got in June.
Many thanks to our panelists. Please give me the hand. Thank you to you also to staying in the room for this excellent panel. I wish you a very good rest of the conference. See you around. We can continue some of the discussions outside of the hall, including Ambassador, I guess.